Hello, my name is A.G. Tan, and I'm an expert in sustainability and ESG reporting, and also in financial planning and analysis. Let's dive right in.
Okay, so the example that we just went through was to point out that there is bottom line opportunity in leveraging your sustainability data. Now, in your business, it might be something different from employee retention, but it exists. But now let's talk a little bit more, get back to the compliance end of things, which is kind of where we started, right? And dig into why exactly that's going on. So we already saw a slide with the what and the timeline for new reporting requirements that are coming in from the EU, California, and others. I haven't been able to verify this, but someone told me that there are something like 17 other states in the United States that are planning to copy the California law. So even if the SEC doesn't push through its, climate risk disclosures rule soon, it's still coming for everybody. And California, I believe, is the fifth biggest economy in the world. So it's very hard to imagine that there's any U.S. company that isn't affected by that. So the main why, though, why is this happening, is investing. Investors recognize that climate risk can pose significant financial risk to companies. There's a reason why insurers are pulling out of providing home insurance in Florida and California, because of drought, hurricanes, forest fires, last week tornadoes. A colleague of mine from Florida told me that her home insurance rates went up like 700% in 1 year. That is crazy. So none of us wants more regulation. Really, none of us wants to have more rules. But as an investor, and by the way, if you have a retirement account, you are an investor too. As an investor, I want reliable, comparable information about how the companies I invested are managing this risk. I want to know what risks are on their radar, and I want to know what their plans are for mitigating those risks. And I want to be able to compare companies on this subject. So, by the way, remember, I know I'm talking about climate risk, but there's a lot more than climate risk. But climate risk is where we're starting, right? So, we can't do everything in one go. I mean, there's enough in climate risk. So, to give you an idea, because I can't look forward into the future, right? So I have this idea that maybe we can go back in time. And yes, that is 2020 AG looking out the window of the time travel machine. We're going to go back in time to the year 2000. And we're going to talk about a company called General Electric. Now, I was doing an MBA in the year 2000. And GE was the star of the stock market. Right. So Jack Welch, who was the CEO, he was like the big hero. Now, you weren't there. Imagine Elon Musk, but everybody loved him. Okay. So he was as big as Elon Musk is today, but more people admired him, right? At the business school, we watched videos of his speeches. We talked about the brilliance of his famous napkin strategy. And just look at how the stock price performed during his tenure. It just went up and up and up. Now, even though we all know intellectually, that past performance is no guarantee of future success, you have to put yourself back in the year 2000. You knew that Jack was retiring. But he had a slew. Oh my God, they used to talk about how brilliant all these deputies were. They were all, one of them like competing like crazy. It was in the news like every week, about which one it was going to be. And even though the year 2000 brought the first .com bust, GE's financials look great. GE consistently hit its numbers and they were rewarded for it. So pretend you were in the year 2000 and this is all you knew. So how would you have been? And I bet I bought GE stock. It made sense, right? It made perfect sense. So, because we're in a time travel machine, we can now look back, right? This is what actually happened from the year 2000. So that red line is an index fund. An index fund reflects, the average of the stock market. The blue line below the red line is the performance of GE after the year 2000. Now, there were a lot of things that made the business climate, there was 9/11, there was wars, there was the 2007 mortgage crisis, and so on, but everybody was affected by that. And that's what's reflected by the red line, but GE actually did worse than that. Now, maybe it's a stretch, right? Maybe you can just say, well, the CEO that Jack Welch picked in the end, Jeff Immelt, maybe he wasn't that good. Or maybe Jack Welch himself had sowed the seeds of GE's failure. Now, I don't know all the answers, right? We could speculate so on. There are books. There's a link to a book at the bottom of the slides we can share with you if you're interested. But here are some things that I now know. And some of these things I knew at the time, right? GE got into trouble for using improper accounting methods. They literally played accounting games to ensure they were hitting their earning targets quarter after quarter after quarter. And because Jack Welch was such a strong character, he was the CEO, he was the chairman of the board, nobody dared to question him. There was effectively no oversight, all right? Eventually, the SEC figured it out, but it cost GE money. And then there was the famous pollution of the Hudson River, and then there were discrimination suits. And what we have here are examples of things that today would be measured by sustainability metrics. The three big categories are environmental, that's E, social, that's S, and G is governance. And 2020 hindsight, GE basically had problems in all three of these. Now, would we have done any differently if we had had this kind of transparency and reporting at the time? I can't say for sure, but certainly going forward, this is the kind of information that I, as an investor, would like to have going forward. And this is the kind of thing that is driving these new regulations. It's coming from investors because they care about their knowledge, basically, at the end. So let's swing back to the opportunity side of the story. So one example is Nike. So we all know who Nike is. They had a stated goal since 2009 to integrate sustainability into all aspects of the strategy. And a lot of companies have said that. They have said they want to do that, but Nike actually did more than say it. They literally built a whole new business, rethought entire product design, rethought their entire supply chain, their manufacturing process for this fly-knit fabric that they came up with. And according to an NYU, New York University, Stern case study on the Nike fly-knit fabric, that whole brand new product line became a $1 billion business in just 3 years. So that's an example of where embracing this whole sustainability thing and using it as an opportunity to really scrutinize your business and see where the opportunities are, see where the future lies, see where the risks are, see where you can have growth, can actually turn into real life. So companies are feeling pressure to be more sustainable, not only from investors, but also from their customers and their employees. It affects all sorts of things. It affects the competition for talent. It affects the competitiveness. There are academic studies that collect data that show that product growth in consumer goods is growing much faster in sort of sustainable products or organic products compared with traditional products. So there's a growth opportunity. If you're first to the market and you're taking advantage of that, you're making more money. So it's a lot. It's overwhelming. But here's the thing. The sustainability standards that we're going to be talking about next provide a structured way to evaluate this risk, to figure out which aspects of all of these things that could be measured, which of them actually make sense for your business. And then from there, you can take a look and dig deeper and see where you might be able to find the opportunity. Now, at a typical company today, there are separate sustainability and financial reporting teams, right? And when I say finance, I'm kind of lumping all of finance together, right? But on the top, you see the sustainability people, and they sometimes both report to the CFO, but generally speaking, the sustainability team will report to somebody else. There might be a chief sustainability officer. It might be corporate social responsibility. It might be environment. It kind of depends a little bit on the history of the company and what industry you're in. On the data that the sustainability people get, they're different from the data that the finance people only get. So they get data from their utilities on how much, they're paying for electricity, gas, whatever, from facilities management, their buildings use energy and so on, from HR, from procurement, from their vendors, from projects. So they get data from different places, and they use a whole bunch of different tools, including IBM and Busy, which, by the way, just a little plug here, we can also help you with. And the audiences have historically been different. Historically, sustainability teams have really been working to meet voluntary reporting standards, all right? And this will sometimes come because investors have said, well, we need you to report to the TCFD and the DRI, and then they would go and do that, but it would be voluntary. There's no audit involved, and so on and so forth, right? Whereas in the finance world, as I think most of you will know, it's a different story. It's much more rigorous. A lot more is expected. But Excel is kind of a common language. Both finance and the sustainability people, when there's nothing else that, available to pull it all together, we all fall back to Excel. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not a good thing in the long run if you're trying to grow and really kind of, get that. So with that, we're going to get to the tools. But before I go there, any questions yet, Justin?
No, not just yet.
All right. I'll assume that everyone's spellbound. Okay. So let's talk about tools, and we're also going to talk about emissions. So this is where we get to sort of the long meat and potatoes, right? So when it comes to tools, I kind of put them in two different buckets. There's things that we'll call standards and framework, which are essentially end-to-end cookbooks. And you can use these cookbooks or recipe books to do different things that you need in order to produce a sustainability report. So the GRI, which stands for Global Reporting Initiative, you can go to gri.org. They have recipes for how you determine materiality, which is really important. Like what's material for your business, what's not material for your business. I mean, if you're a bank, then perhaps the price of gas is not the most material thing for you, right? The GHG protocol gives you step-by-step instructions on how to calculate emissions. And you might think, oh my God, do I have to put sensors and everything? No, there are also methods by which you can estimate emissions. And then there are ways in which if you have, if your best option right now is to estimate, but in the future, you could actually measure more accurately, then there are ways which you can evolve over time. SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standard Boards, this is now owned by IFRS. Basically, the accountants, they give you very detailed instructions on how to report metrics. And then the TCFD, which has actually been embraced by a lot of the regulators, is really a disclosure framework being more about explaining why you're reporting this, what your risks are, what your processes are for mitigating the risks, and so on and so forth. On the right-hand side, we have technology. First of all, let me say, everyone's selling you a silver bullet, but there isn't one, all right? Just as anybody who's been through the process of implementing financial planning software, you know that pulling together the data is non-trivial, and there is no magic that is going to do all of that work for you. Now, if you have good tools, it's less painful that you don't have good tools. But the other thing to keep in mind, that some of the sustainability reporting problem is very familiar, should be very familiar to people who have gone through a financial reporting or an FP&A implementation. Very familiar looking component. Okay. So here we have a slide that sort of like gives you, again, we've already seen slides that have some of this, examples of metrics, right? And again, as I said earlier, the standards and the frameworks help you figure out which of these metrics are most relevant to you. Some of the standards bodies and the regulators actually issue kind of like report cards on how people have done in the past. And it's interesting, some companies trying to report on all the possible metrics without really taking the time to figure out what is most material for them. What the regulators and what everybody really wants or would prefer that people did was to take more time on that analysis to figure out what's material. And as I said, the GRI gives you step-by-step instructions on how to do that. And then to focus on doing a really good job on a smaller number of metrics that are material. And that's also going to make a lot more sense when you then want to take that data and tie it into your financial modeling and get real business benefit out of it, right? So now the standards, and there are, somebody said that there were like 3 different standards, and then someone else said there were 300 different standards. So there are a lot of standards out there, standards and frameworks. But what I'm talking about here is the starter set. And a lot of the standards and frameworks, it's sort of like tied to industry specific things or, various sort of groups looking at like drilling deep into specific areas. But the big picture ones are definitely the ones that you start. This is definitely the slide that I wanted 2 years ago, that I would have loved to have somebody explain to me. Okay, so the GRI has been around a long time. 96% of the global 250 already report to the GRI. So if you're a large company, there's a good chance that you have already voluntarily been reporting to the GRI. SAFI is a little bit newer, but it provides sort of detailed industry specific metrics. So that makes it a lot easier for you to kind of help pare it down. The TCFD is a lot about, as I said earlier, discussion about climate risk, mitigation efforts, explaining gaps and so on. And the greenhouse gas protocol is kind of like an underpinning for all of that because it's really the most, let's say, commonly accepted method for measuring your emissions. Now, I said earlier that ESG and sustainability reporting is much more than climate. The climate is the one that everyone's focusing on first, and that's the one that all the regulators are talking about at the moment. So in the past, these were all sort of, again, voluntary. A lot of companies have been reporting on them voluntarily, which means that you don't necessarily have to report on everything. You can pick and choose what you like and so on. But in 2023, the European Union passed its Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and California passed SB 261 and 253, and then, of course, the SEC Climate Disclosure Rule. So the California, the U.S. one is sort of very much around the TCFD, so that's kind of what they're using as their basis for the regulations, whereas the EU is much broader around overall ESG, but the climate and emission stuff is still a very big part of it. By 2024, people should start collecting data so that by 2025, you can start reporting to a limited assurance standard. And then within about 3 years or so, they're going to start looking for a reasonable insurance standard, which is a much higher audit standard for these reports, which the CFO needs to sign off on, which is another reason why finance people need to pay attention.